going? Simon, great to meet you.
Great to meet you too, Joe.
Are you in the UK?
No, I'm in the Netherlands.
Oh, you're
I'm,
in the Netherlands. Okay,
I'm,
excellent.
I'm from the UK, but I live in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, it's great to catch up with you about the album. Thank you for reaching out to the show. Looking forward to peeling back the layers of Black Gold 360. So thank you.
No worries, man. Nice to be on the show.
So let's get into it. Before we actually get into the album at the still point of the turning point or the turning world, I want to know first and foremost, 5 years ago, we were looking at this pandemic and trying to figure it out. It wiped away tours and did so much. How much of living through that pandemic influenced the way that you approach music and even this album?
Yeah, that was crazy, right? All
Yeah,
that
yeah.
crazy time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, we in Holland here, we even had curfew. In the evening, you couldn't go out and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was mad. You could go out if you had a dog to
Right.
walk the dog. We have a dog, so people were borrowing our dog to go out. But yeah. I mean, I'm more of a producer, so I could go to the studio,
Yeah.
so I could carry on working. And my wife, even she's an office manager, so she was the only one allowed in the office. So she went out. Kids
Yeah.
stayed at home, loving it. Parents were out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, 2020, we made an album during that. I mean, we wrote it in 2020, and then we brought in the musicians one layer at a time, one person at a time. Uh, and so that came out in 2021, Dreams of the Revelator. So it was kind of productive because you have a lot more time and you've got nobody else calling you for things. So yeah, it was weird time, but tried not to let it get on top of me. It was I had to go to England a few times, and I just went. I just filled a form in and just went.
Yeah.
And at the airport, like, okay, the airport was deserted. It was like a zombie film. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but yeah, you just got to get on with it, right? That's
Yeah.
it. You got to do your thing.
Certainly do. So talk to me a little bit about this new album. What was kind of the artistic vision? It's a nice mashup of, it's like you embrace that 70s electronic vibe of the jazz world that everybody kind of left behind years ago. And you've embraced this. Talk to me a little bit about this project.
Yeah, no, exactly. That sounds right. Normally, the way that the albums work is that I come up with some sketches and stuff, and then I bring in some like awesome Dutch jazz musicians, and they made me look really good, because they're all amazing. And this was the same, but normally we do it acoustic, so it's double bass, piano, horns, and so on. And then this time, I actually went to the cinema with my kids. It was 50 years since Enter the Dragon, it's Lalo Schifrin soundtrack, and we went to see this. The kids thought it was a comedy,
Yeah.
but it was brilliant, and the music was incredible. And then at the same time, a friend of mine gave me an album. It was Lalo Schifrin. It was a best of like Dirty Harry stuff like that on it, and it's just incredible. This music, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
And I was those sort of soundtracks, and I was a big fan always of Herbie Hancock's Death Wish. That's an amazing album. It's very sort of fragmented, and then Marvin Gaye, Trouble Man. So we're like, okay, let's do an electric album like that. And luckily, with these musicians, you can just say we're going to do this, and they're like, fine, no problem. They can just deliver it.
Yeah.
You play them a track, they go, okay, that's what you mean, and they just do it.
Yeah.
They're just incredible guys.
It's amazing how when you look at Herbie Hancock's life, like everybody sees him as this acoustic guy that Miles Davis found, and people
Yeah,
forget about the Beverly Hills soundtrack and all these other more electronic based ventures that he was on there in that kind of 80s, late 70s time period.
yeah. I mean, he was. I mean, I don't. It's interesting that he did a soundtrack like that because I mean,
Yeah.
quite often people do soundtracks, when they're at the end of their careers or that's their job in the first place. But he must have just done it for the pleasure of it.
Yeah.
And but I mean, in the case of Death Wish, I mean, it is dark. It's
Yeah.
a dark album, like nothing else
Yeah.
he's made. His albums are always kind of, you know, they give you life. They're fun. They're great. But this is just so dark.
Yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit about Black Gold 360. Talk to me about the beginnings and the evolution of it.
Um, when I first came to Holland here, I used to DJ. So we used to DJ in clubs here with some friends, and from that we started making electronic music, dance music, and lounge music, and that kind of thing. And then I got quite influenced by an Austrian producer called Bernd Friedman, and he made a sort of mashup of like jazz and electronics, very sort of intricately programmed. And I found this fascinating. So I sort of started to make music like that, sort of electronic jazz, just cutting up samples and that kind of stuff. And it was good fun, but you can only go so far. And then I met Kuhn, the saxophonist, and he sort of has his fingers in all the world of jazz here. So he played on the first album, and then slowly just introduced me to all the other guys on the album. And he goes, "You should get this guy. He's awesome. You should get this guy." And so basically, through him, I sort of brought these projects to life, really, with different musicians.
So talk to me a little bit about, it's interesting. During the pandemic, I noticed a lot more electronica happening. I noticed a lot more experimentation. People were getting away from just strictly acoustic jazz and going into all of these different realms. Did you notice that? Have you noticed now that there's been kind of more of an influx of this electronic vibe coming into the jazz world?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is quite a lot more of that. I'm not sure if it's pandemic related. Maybe it's more to do with the fact that anybody can make music in their bedroom now. It's phenomenal. I think there's something like 60,000 tracks a day loaded up to Spotify. Because in the old days, you needed a studio, you needed all the gear, you needed the musicians. But now, if you can understand programs and so on, your imagination is all you need. So you
Yeah.
get a lot of people doing it like that. But the best ones are always the when they combine real musicians with the electronics, and it's much more interesting. Because I mean, the thing about jazz is it's so sort of free the way it's made, and there's just no boundaries, and there's so many possibilities, and you don't make electronic music that way. It's very structured and strict the way you make it, but the results are kind of similar. It can be anything. There's no real rules to it. And so when you combine the two, I think it's always quite interesting. Yeah,
You're familiar with the work of Moby?
yeah. Back in the day, yeah.
Yeah, so he has a podcast now, and I've been listening to how
Oh yeah,
he constructed some of these songs, like God moving over the face of the waters that was in that movie Heat, and just kind of the way he layered the piano and just things that have gone like he had a podcast on the album Play and said that that was going to be it. He expected no one to buy it, and that's turned into the iconic electronic album of all time, right? You
yeah,
know.
yeah.
And it's amazing though, and why I bring that up is there's a lot of elements of the way that he works that blends all these genres and doesn't have rules. That is why jazz is such a free form. And it's interesting how electronica can kind of evade those rules and become something much more organic and just kind of have a life of its own.
Yeah, I mean, it's back to the 60s and the 70s now for people that can afford it with electronics. All the analog amps with the cables and stuff. There's a guy in Utrecht called Kite Man, and he started off with a hip hop orchestra. It was called huge orchestra, really popular in Holland and Belgium, and he played the trumpet himself. And then he now just makes electronic music with just these huge banks of equipment, with all these cables and stuff. And this stuff is expensive,
Yeah,
especially if you get the 70s stuff. So in a way, if you make it like that, it is very organic.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then whereas if you make it with programs, on your computer, it's less organic. But yeah, it has the same result in the end when you listen to it. But in the moment, the joy of the improvisation in jazz, the reacting to each other and all that, you don't really have that as much in electronic music. It's not
Yeah.
as yeah.
Yeah. So take me back to your beginnings. Where were you born and raised? How did you get into producing? How did you get into loving jazz and loving electronica? How did this happen?
Well, I was born in Manchester, in England, and and when I grew up, I was into metal, and rock and all that kind of stuff. And in my school, most of the kids would listen to like Depeche Mode and Duran Duran and this kind of stuff, but we were like listening to mostly American rock. And then I kind of got into indie music, and then I met three guys who lived in a house together, Al, Ben, and Richard, and they would play jazz all the time. I used to go around to their house and just go, "What is this?" And after a while, it really, it's such an inclusive art form. You know what I mean? Anyone is allowed to do it. There's no rules. It's really beautiful in that way, and it's like soundtrack music all the time. So
Yeah.
if you play it, it's the soundtrack to whatever you're doing. And so they were the guys that sort of got me into it. And the producing came here which is like from DJing, moving into production sort of thing with an old sampler with 900 MB on it and that kind of stuff. So it was that was the progression. And like I said before, we met some jazz musicians, and then yeah, it grew from that really, and still going.
So talk to me a little bit about the first live show you saw that blew you away, and then the first live jazz show that you saw that really knocked your socks off.
The first live show that I ever saw where it blew my mind was David Lee Roth. Yeah,
Wow.
I saw David Lee Roth in in the early '90s in the NEC in Birmingham, which is a huge centre. I've never seen anybody put on so much effort into a show. It was incredible because I never saw Van Halen.
Yeah.
Missed them just. But this was incredible. He did a steel band section, he did an acoustic section. They carried him across the crowd on a surfboard. There was a boxing ring in the middle of the stadium. He appeared on a rope down into that. It was just full on effort. You got your money's worth.
Yeah.
And I think for jazz, I went to see a band called Triosk. I don't think they exist anymore.
Okay.
Which is they were a trio, and it was acoustic, but they just played in like little patterns, and it was really, really sort of mesmerizing when you watched it. I think they've split up, but yeah, that was phenomenal to see because they didn't just play one song then another song. They would put like 4 tracks in a row without speaking in between, and that would take you away for 20 minutes, and then they'd talk a little bit, and then they play another 4 that went together. So it was a real journey.
So I did David Lee Roth's in the air. I just interviewed a Venezuelan pianist that actually played with him and was talking about
No
him
way.
just an hour ago.
No way.
And it's so weird you bring up that show because I didn't see David Lee Roth and when he was with them I saw him with Van Hagar, but I did see David Lee Roth at one of our premier amphitheaters. It was called Sandstone back in the 90s here in Kansas City. And I remember there was a good friend of mine and she was just loved him and said, "You got to come with me." And I'm like, "All right, let's do it." He came out on a massive inflatable microphone. He's riding it like a bull. And I was just like, what? But he was gonzo. And I've heard interviews with him. This is the trippiest thing about David Lee Roth. When he was done, I believe there was an interlude between Van Halen and his solo career, or maybe it was after his solo career. He became an EMT in New York City. And he was just riding around in the back of ambulances working on people.
Really?
Isn't that crazy? To
Yeah,
think that
really.
this dude that could just literally do anything on a stage, marshal just unbelievable amounts of money, felt it within his soul to actually work on the human body and be in that cauldron of stress in New York City.
Wow, that's amazing. You must have
Crazy,
had some
dude.
kind of epiphany or something.
Yeah, right. That's
How long did he do that for?
I think he did it for a few years. It was
Really?
yeah, it was a Joe Rogan interview, and I was just listening to his life because I've seen him in interviews, and he's like his brain and where he is definitely high on the Mensa chart of IQ. Like you can just
Yeah.
all of these things that are going through him are just flying. The engineer for my radio show, his name's John Christopher. He worked in radio for years and years in Kansas City and saw him in the Van Halen days and said, "Yeah, I think he was on a little bit of speed. Something was going on because that dude was just like this, just all
Yeah,
no
yeah.
no stop." But
You don't
um,
know.
he's definitely an icon. So I'm curious, what has been kind of the secret to you evolving through these genres of music and continuing to do what you do? What is it that gets you up every day? Why do you love this?
Uh, Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just an experiment, really. You know, I just go, okay, what should we do next? You know, and the nice thing is, it's which guys do we work with for it? You know, and then, with the Black Gold 360, it's mostly the same guys. Every album, there's a new one we add, but it's the process. It's, you start off with some ideas, just some loops, some bass lines, whatever, and it's very rough. And then you bring these musicians in, and it's just they're so good. They're
Yeah.
such, I mean, they're all professional jazz musicians. And that's what they do for a living. And then you come in and they listen to your music, and they're like, this is just so easy. And off they go, and they just one take, maybe two. They're just, and that's just a joy to see a sort of small idea become like something much more expansive just because of their talent, basically. I mean, they really are.
You know what's interesting about jazz musicians, and I didn't realize this till I started covering it. I started my show in 2011, so I've been doing this for a little bit. Is that you always hear these stories of like Radiohead or U2 or the Stones going to the studio and they're going to be in there for a couple of weeks, 2, 3 weeks. Jazz musicians are in there for hours. They just
Yeah,
go
yeah,
in, right?
yeah,
And they're
yeah, yeah,
out. It's just it's a different world.
yeah, yeah. No, really. I mean, they're so. I mean, they put so much work in to get there, to get to be able to do that. You know what
Yes.
I mean? I mean, a lot of them here, they'll be called for different kinds of genres. There'll be a ska band, or some pretty big bands in Holland where they'll play in a stadium, and they go, okay, we need a solo in the brass section, so they bring them in, and they just okay,
That's
and they
it.
just do it. And
Yeah.
these guys have been hammering, practicing with this band for years, and then the jazz musician comes in, has a quick look at it, and goes, got it. And it's annoying for people like me that aren't that musical to see this, but at the same time, it's so brilliant. It's so reassuring. I mean, we don't back when we first did our first gig, it was years ago. It was like the Dutch film festival is here in Utrecht, where I live, and so they have like the Dutch Oscars, if you like. And so they said, "Can you come and play there, like an area where people just hang out and stuff, like a bar?" And it was the first ever gig. I was like, "Whoa!" I was really, really nervous. But these guys just didn't matter what happened; they couldn't cover anything. They're so used to it. They
Yeah.
just because but it's not. They have to put the work in to be that good,
Yeah.
to be able to be that loose and free in the moment.
Yeah.
They've gone through the patterns, they've gone through the scales, they know it all backwards. The theory. It's not
Yeah.
just it's not like a blues musician or something. It's all feeling. To get the feeling, they have to have done the technique.
Yeah.
So they've done the work.
They certainly have. So, are you touring? Is this something that you're going to be doing any live shows to promote the new album?
No, no
Okay.
tour, no, no,
Okay.
no live shows at all. We used to do it back in the day when we started, but each one of those musicians has their own thing going, and they're nearly all parents, as well, and they and so we're even having a get together to celebrate the launch of the album, and even finding a date for that took like weeks. So they always go, yeah, we should play live. I was like, good luck getting everyone together. The seven of us. So it might happen again. We did it back in the day a few times. It was nice,
So to
but
paint, yeah, for sure. So to paint a visual
oh,
of this album, tell me the players on the album, and if someone is out there wondering if they want to buy this, we've kind of touched on a little bit of the sound of it. Give them kind of a nice, enticing overview of the album for them to buy it.
well, like you said at the beginning, it's a sort of got a '70s sort of vibe to it, electric soundtrack sort of music. Uh, what I'd always want for listeners, I'd like if they get lost while they listen to it.
Yeah.
I still believe in the album rather than the single and the playlists and the Spotify. I like, I'm like music from the '70s and the '60s where you play the whole album, and you go from beginning to end, and sometimes you play it again and again. Like you play like Kind of Blue, you don't know where you are half the time. It's just incredible. So it's albums should be listenable to all the way through, and these musicians, they're all just like totally top level musicians, and so that everything they do on it is beautiful, and every section carries through to the next section, and they all play together really, really well. and it's you know it's fun. It's a fun album to listen to, I think, and yeah, every time I listen to it, I enjoy hearing stuff. Even though I produced it, I still feel like I hear things different in each solo and in each groove in it. So I'm very pleased with the result of it.
So if anybody wants to pick up a copy, any of the previous albums, check into what you're doing, any of the good business, where do they go?
Everything is on all the streaming services. Well, actually, this album's out on the 1st of May. So from the 1st of May, the singles are on there now. So Spotify, you know, all the usual Apple Music. There's vinyl. There's no CD. So if anybody wants vinyl, they can buy it from the link on Spotify, or they can go to $50 Records site, and it's on there. And vinyl's back, isn't it? So it's last time we produced CDs and we give them to people, and they go, "What am I going to play this on?"
Right.
so it's vinyl this time.
Right on. Well, hey, I'm going to put links in the show notes. Simon, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time, and best of luck with the release on May 1.
Yeah, cheers, Joe. Good luck with the
Jazz
show.
fans, Joe Domino here, the host of the weekly Neon Jazz radio show and regular interview series being produced and distributed from Lee Summit, Missouri. We are very excited to let you know about the second annual Lee Summit Jazz Festival taking place again this summer on June 28th at the Bridge Space, located at 210 Southwest Market Street in downtown Lee Summit. Following the success of the 2024 festival, the lineup will include Lee Summit students, Casey Area Youth Jazz, Paganova with Michael Pagan, Horoscope with Stan Kessler, Brad Gregory, Adam Larson, and the Lee Summit Jazz Orchestra. There will also be food trucks and vendors to round out a day of celebration. Early bird tickets are 2 for $30, and all details can be found at lsjazzfest.com. We can't wait to see you there.